some sponsors will literally just show up, hand you the book, tell you to read it. There's not like a training manual on how to be a sponsor.
Tony, would you like to respond to that? I know I would.
When you've been beaten enough, you'll go to a meeting, you'll find a sponsor, and you'll try something else because you're at the end of your road.
If we built a relationship that you can come back to me and tell me that you gamed me or whatever, that's great. I'm glad you're alive, and I'm glad you realized that, and that you did some work.
All right. Welcome back, everyone, to our fourth episode of Ask the Addict. And I want to thank everyone for the people who have listened to our podcast, and just want to say how much we appreciate you and the feedback that you've given to us. And tonight we have a guest with us, and we're very excited to have our guest with us. And before I have him introduce himself, here's the intro question I want to ask each of you. Okay, and that's what are our best hopes for tonight's episode? Okay, my best hope, again, I'm Mace. I'm a family member of somebody who's in long-term recovery. I'm also a licensed professional counselor and a certified life coach and recovery life coach. And my best hopes for tonight is I really want this to be a space and a time for family members who are listening, because this really is for the families who love someone who is struggling with an addiction, and they have questions. They're not sure what direction to go with their loved one. I'm going to go to Tony. Tony, what's your best hopes for tonight?
Hey, I'm Tony. I am a person who has been sober for a little bit under 5 years. Now I celebrate 5 years, God willing, coming up in January. And, I started this journey of sobriety when I was 22 years old. I am 42 years old now, and I have almost 5 years. So that's, if your mathematics are a little bit there, that you can tell that me and my family have had a long journey in order for me to get some sober time. I went to multiple treatment centers. The last one being Steps to Recovery in Levittown, Pennsylvania, where I got sent and had some success there. Went out and tried it on my own again. And then the state of Wisconsin gave me my final draw, and I went to state prison and got sober in there and got out and went back to Steps to Recovery. And I've been sober ever since. So my best, wishes for tonight are that if just one family or one family member can build a relationship back, or start a new relationship, or mend a relationship with their loved one who is struggling, by me, answering any questions with my experience, strength, and hope. That's what I'm here for, and that's what drives me. So.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, my name's Matt. I'm an alcoholic. I'm also an addictions counselor working 4 Steps to Recovery. I'm also an alumni of the program as well. That's kind of how the 4 of us all know each other in various capacities, brought together by that facility, right? And I have a little bit over 3.5 years. I really enjoy working with, the clients that I do, and also the families. It gives me a lot of great perspective just all around, and it benefits my own recovery too, in the sense that, like, I understand what I put the people in my life through, which I think is really important, and, helps me remember why I need to continue this journey that I'm on. And, my hope for tonight, which has actually already come true. I really wanted our guest to be on tonight, so it's, I'm surprised. But, beyond that, I think, he has really great knowledge of like trauma, and we were talking about Gabor Mate before the show. I'd love to hear some stuff about that, and also just like the extensive experience that you have in all clinical capacities in treatment, which I think can really benefit the loved ones of family members, just kind of knowing like what their options are and what goes on behind the scenes.
Manny.
So I'll introduce myself. My name is Manny Rivera. I am the Senior Director of Clinical Services for STR Behavioral Health. I've been with STR since basically a month after the doors opened, so about over 10 years now. And I have about 15 years in substance use experience working in a residential prior to STR, and before that in various roles with adolescents as well. I really love what I do. I love interacting with hundreds of people over the years and their families. I've always, ever since I was a kid, I really wanted to help in any way that I could. It's part of my story, but at the same time, it's given me so much to be a resource to families and clients over the years. In my prior role before this new one, I was the executive director of Steps to Recovery, and it was a change of pace going from a counselor to more of an administrative role, and it's taken me out of direct client care all the time. And I relish these opportunities to speak to anyone or families because it is still a great passion of mine, and I really love helping. So I hope after this that I was helpful in some capacity, or answer any questions that may be on people's minds.
Okay. All right. Thank you and welcome, Manny. We're so excited to be here. So one of the things that we do in this podcast is we bring questions that families bring to us. So and a lot of the questions come from the families that we work with. Steps to Recovery offers a free virtual family recovery support group. So I'd love Matt at some point to put the that link, because that is open to anyone, and with it being virtual, anybody can jump on. So as I was thinking about tonight, and Manny, you being with us, one of the things that comes up a lot, and so we'll see where the conversation goes. And, I'm going to ask the three of you to kind of help me tie it together. But the question that comes up a lot is, when is the right time for couples and family therapy? And when is the right time so I'm going to kind of give you a bunch of questions, and then I'll let each of you kind of pick out which one you want to tackle. When is, let me pause that. They want to know, why in treatment is it so focused on groups and not individual sessions? And then another topic that kind of comes in that gets weaved throughout that is the difference between getting a sponsor and a therapist. And why do we push? There's this push for, you got to get a sponsor, and families don't have a lot of families don't have any idea what that is. And then when their loved one doesn't have a sponsor, it's, well, do they need a therapist? And how do I get them to get a sponsor? And so I think tonight, if we can just kind of take a dive into therapy, the importance of therapy, when it's helpful, when it's not. I don't know. Let's tease it apart. Who wants to take a first stab at it?
You said we only have 50 minutes?
Yes, we do. What time is it? 7:20.
On the one topic alone, I'll spend an hour. So.
Hours.
Let's see where it takes. It's
yeah, these are good.
These are good questions that comes up all the time.
Well, if I may, the first question you asked was for couples and families. When is the right time?
Yeah.
To engage in therapy. I'll jump in on that one first. I mean, for many years, that's a pervasive question, right? That's something that you've alluded to, Mace, over the years and working with families. I know we've had conversations on that, and I think when both people or both parties really are ready to hear each other. And when I say hear each other, it really is, it's beyond just listening, right? Like active listening really requires that we put our own agenda or egos aside and listen to the other person's experience, through an objective lens. And a lot of times that subjectivity, that we're introduced to is just like, our old stuff that can pop up, and it's very normal and natural for that to happen. But if we're really talking about productive family work or productive like couples therapy, you have to enter it into a place of being able to hear the other person's experience without filtering it through your own experience, which is really tough to do, and just requires your own individual work prior to that. So a lot of families want to know when they can do a family session. They want to urgently get to that, and I imagine the same goes for like couples therapy outside and like individual practices and things like that, or private practices. And that's the big theme for me. When I'm having those conversations with families or a client, really being ready to enter into that space. It takes time. It takes a lot of time. And when someone comes into a residential facility or even an outpatient, a PHP or an IOP, that whole process is an evaluative process, right? Like you're assessing where you're at and what's going on, and are you as the client able to hear the other side, because that's going to be really difficult to process and hear from someone else. And then on the other side, the family riddled with pain and fear and their own guilt and shame. Are they ready to hear what they've been scared to hear from their loved one for that time? So it's not really a timetable, it's not really an answer necessarily, but at the same time it is, it really is a feel out process.
So I want to toss a follow-up question over to Matt and Tony from the Ask the Addict. Like, if I'm asking you, I feel like you all give a lot of pushback where you don't want the therapy. You're just pushing back on it, and the family is saying they want therapy, they want to come in. And so what's the pushback about?
Well, I think number one, Manny mentioned something important, and he was talking about you got to be willing to invest the time. And when I'm ripping and running, or when I've just stopped ripping and running and coming in and trying to get sober, the last thing I want to do is sit with somebody who I don't know for an hour, 2 or 3 days a week, because you know why? Because I've got to catch up on life. I just was throwing my whole life away, and now I need to catch up on it. In my mind, I need to catch up on it in a couple of months. So the last thing that I'm going to be willing to do is sit in a room with a man or a woman who I don't know and talk about things that I don't want to talk about. So I think that for me, I know a lot of the pushback at first, I would do it when I was in the treatment center because I had to abide by the rules of the treatment center, or I would get kicked out. And then, everything would start spiraling backwards. So I would do it in there. But once I got out and it was still recommended, you got to be crazy. I'm not going to see him for another hour. I just talked to him for 4 weeks. I'm good. You know what I mean? And I think it's as simple as, I ain't got time for that. I got to make money. I got to get a job. I got to get a girlfriend or a boyfriend, what have you. I've got stuff that I've got to do. I ain't got time for that.
Thank you so much for that, Tony, because we hear it all the time. And when folks come out of treatment and they're recommended for follow-up therapy, families get, and Matt, we hear this right on the family program all the time. They get so frustrated because they stop going to the program. So great insight there. Matt, what did you want to say about it?
doing that family session, especially like the first couple, there's a lot of this is my day of reckoning, right? Like this is when I'm going to talk to my mom or my wife or whoever, and they're going to tell me all of the terrible things that I've done. And that's really hard to hear. I might not feel ready to hear it. I might not feel ready to apologize for it. And when you get the people that don't want to do that, it's like, okay, I don't want to sit here and have my wife yell at me for all the things that I've done, and she doesn't understand. There's a lot of like I always talk about the importance of communication, right? There's so much of a disconnect between, what my motivations are that lead to my actions versus like what is happening to you and what you're experiencing. Um, and then on the flip side, when I am really gung ho about wanting to do a family session, it's usually because I want something from you. And that's like, I want to prove to you that I'm doing really well. So you let me come move back in with you, or you don't leave me, or like whatever the thing is. And maybe it's just as genuine as like, I really want this relationship with my partner to work. But sometimes there is that like, hey, I'm going to kind of like butter him up a little bit to make sure that they don't take my car away.
Yeah, yeah. I love those family sessions when I get in there and it's you are trying to convince your family that the treatment center is just not meeting your needs. The therapists suck. The people there are way worse than you are. And I just want to come home. Please let me come home. I'm done here. I've gotten everything I can out of it.
Yeah.
And I want to come home.
Yeah.
It's really multifaceted, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many things going on both sides of the aisle between the family and the loved one in treatment, and no one's wrong, which is the tough part, the even tougher part with regards to it all. The experience of someone ripping and running and not ready, um, as a defense mechanism, right? Like running from themselves, running from shame, guilt, pain, and the loved one wanting to help and wanting to be there, not realizing that there are norms in the relationship that have caused rifts, and those rifts are deep. They're deeply set in, and they're part of the subculture of that family, oftentimes. And so it's I'm not ready. I'm going to keep using, or I'm just not ready to talk, or I'm not ready to feel that shame, because it's just the perception, and all of it is valid. All of it is real. It's as real as our minds can make it, which is a powerful entity in all of this, right? So it's it is very painful. At the end of the day, at the core of it all, it's all related to pain, right? So how we have learned how to treat pain, and how we've learned to cope with pain and deal with it. This is how it comes out in certain ways, in these certain dynamics. I want to attack it. I want to approach it. I want to get into it, or I want to run from it. I want to get away from it. I want to distract myself. And you know, in most relationships where they're involved, there's love, and that's the part that gets hurt the most, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, how important on a scale of what matters during, let's say, early recovery? Because a lot of it, there's different spaces where families want therapy. There's, before somebody gets into recovery, they're pushing for their loved one to get into therapy because they think somehow if a therapist can uncover that deep trauma or the issue, then that will solve the addiction problem. So they're pushing therapy then. But then there's also when they're in treatment, they start pushing therapy because they see, okay, they're sober now. Now's my opportunity. Like Matt said, day of reckoning. I want my apology, and I want to, and all the other dynamics of that going on. And then there's when you get discharged from treatment, and your aftercare plan says therapy, and you're not going to therapy. But on a scale of like 1 to 10, like I'm curious to know, like, how important do you feel therapy is?
I know for me that, I mean, ever since, going back to when I first tried to come in, I was always suggested to go to an IOP. When I left my first treatments when I was in my early 20s, I was always suggested to get an individual therapist. Because when you become somebody like myself who was a chronic relapser, there's something it might not be just one isolated thing, but there are things there or some one big thing there that you just haven't been willing to deal with and talk with somebody about. And that's the assumption, I think, from normal people and people who are addicts. So having that person to talk, I mean, honestly, I think it's up there around an 8 or a 9. And if for nothing else, it's important because what it does is it gets you used to talking in front of somebody who you don't know, which is what you need to do in sobriety at meetings or with a sponsor once you meet them in order to stay sober for the rest of your life. So if that's nothing more than your practice person to start getting stuff out there for people who are in recovery, then it's key that you not only have the group therapy, but you have, maybe you meet with that person, that therapist once a week for an hour or 30 minutes, whatever it is, just one-on-one, so that you get used to telling the underlying stuff that you don't like talking about with other people to somebody else, because that's what you're going to have to get used to down the road in order to stay sober a long time.
So, Tony, I want to ask you a follow-up question. So if you were going to go back to your younger self, whether it's 5 years ago when you're in steps to recovery and you do not want to do family therapy, you do not want to do individual therapy, based on what you just said, what would you go back and tell yourself 5 years ago?
That when you get serious about staying sober a day at a time for a long time, this is what you need to do. And until you're sick, if you're not ready to at least give it listen, when I'm beaten enough, I'll and let me say that again. When I'm beaten enough, whether I've been living homeless for multiple months down in Kensington, whether I have been to state prison, whatever your circumstance is, whether some people don't have as low a bottom as some other people. Maybe you failed your college final and you're not going to get out of college, and now your mom and dad won't talk to you. Whatever your last draw is, when you've been beaten enough, when somebody says, you know what, I think you need to try therapy. Okay, I'll give it a try.
Yeah,
it's the same concept as recovery. As when you've been beaten enough, you'll go to a meeting, you'll find a sponsor, and you'll try something else because you're at the end of your road. Nothing else has worked. It just meant that I wasn't beaten enough at that time,
I'm a big Teddy Swims fan. I don't know if any of you know him, but he has an album cover that says, "I've tried everything but therapy." So, yeah.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
But I want to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to toss it back out to Matt and Manny. How soon after? So again, 5 years ago, you're in steps. You're really serious at this point about getting clean and sober. How soon did you get a sponsor? Because I do want us to segue into that. Not right yet, but at some point. I'm just curious to know, how soon did you get a sponsor?
Right away.
Away.
My first week, I was at Croydon, and I asked Brian to sponsor me because he had sponsored me previously when I was here in 2014. But I asked him. I saw Eddie Quinn. He said, "Hey, my son-in-law is still around. Do you want to?" And I called him right there. So it was probably the third day I was there, I think, that I asked him right away.
Because you had experience of working the program before, and it being good for you at that time.
Yes, yeah. I had had previous sponsors and had gotten to step 9 or 10 before, but never went all the way through. But that I knew that was the beginning. You know,
Yeah.
you gotta find a sponsor, and then things when you find that sponsor, things what do we call it? Things spin off of that. You can go to the meeting they go to. You can hang out with the people they hang out with. You can mimic their program until you get your own when you come in. You can also call them about anything that, you know, most people leave the door open to call anytime, any day. It's just somebody to talk to. There's a lot of different things besides taking somebody through the 12 steps that getting a sponsor does that are beneficial and completely necessary immediately.
Okay.
Well, let me jump in because the reason why I asked that too, Tony, or say that, Tony, because I think it's important to the first question too. I was pausing in the beginning of that question because I didn't want to be too biased. It is my profession. So to say 10 out of 10 would be, um, what's the word I want to say? Presumptuous, I guess. But um, I do think it's a 10 out of 10 for the mere fact of the introduction. A lot of times, planting the seed is a common phrase in recovery and in treatment. Um, introductions to therapy, introductions to group therapy, introductions to sponsorship and to meetings lays a foundation, whether they do it in that moment or when they're ready, a year from then, 10 years from now, um, it is important. It's an important process to introduce that there is a group of people doing it, staying clean and happy, with their lives and with what's going on. It's that ideology around attraction over promotion, which really does work. Sadly, the type of drugs that are out there, it doesn't always yield the old sort of response of like, well, when they come around, next time they can get it when things get bad enough. It's unfortunately, more lethal than ever, where that's not really an opportunity for a lot of people. So there's more urgency now, I think, than ever. But at the same time, the rule still applies, I think, in regards to, well, they still need an experience. And Matt and I talk about this a lot, where it's, like if someone can experience a room with someone else where you're not only listened to, like really listened to, but like your experience is validated, not enabled, right? Like not excuses given, but just validated, right? That opens the door towards understanding that like I have been living this life where I'm running and I'm constantly running and ultimately I'm running from myself or running from my trauma, running from what I've been through. But you can't get there until you feel like that's going to be worthwhile or worthwhile experience and heard, right? And so that's a really important process. And so like that's why therapy for me is so important. And the experience that I've had with people is just sort of those aha moments where it's more about creating a novel experience for so many people that just have never sat down and really talked about anything. Because they were, riddled with shame, guilt, or just were never given that opportunity, right? I'll go back to, I've heard this expression a lot. It was actually in a podcast I was listening to with Gabor Mate. I was talking to Matt about it, where I've heard this expression too, Tone and Matt. I'm sure you've heard it too. Just when someone uses an opiate, they experience, for the first time, it felt like a warm hug. And that's not an accident. I don't think, that experience that so many people share, just feeling like that's a novel experience. Like, why is that a novel experience? Because maybe they haven't experienced that enough as a kid or growing up. And that's not to bring up blame or shame or anything like that on the side of the family. It's just these are what are reported oftentimes by clients over the years. And so therapy can be that, not as potent, but still that experience of someone really listening and feeling like someone cares.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all of that. I mean, I think it's redundant at this point to say, therapy is like a 9 or a 10 for, not just addicts and alcoholics. Like I truly believe that every single person should have a therapist. Like therapists have therapists. That's how important they are. Um, and kind of to circle back to one of your questions, which is like, what's the difference between a sponsor and a therapist? There can be a lot of different, like, there's not a national association for sponsorship. Like there's not like a training manual on how to be a sponsor like there is like a therapist or something, and some sponsors will literally just show up, hand you the book, tell you to read it, and then, they'll have you do a fourth and fifth step. They'll tell you to pray about it. I come to you like, "Oh my God, my dog died today, XYZ." They're like, "Well, did you pray about it?" Like, you didn't really help me that much, man, but I'll try to pray about it. Which is a valid like method, but that's not I wouldn't be very good at my job as a therapist if I did that, right? I'd probably get fired at some point. But and that's where like the therapist more is like there's someone there to kind of like hear you, validate you, and also maybe help you like subtly reframe your thinking on things. Whereas a sponsor is more of just kind of like a mentor in a way, where they're just following, let's do step 1 through 12, and you know, now you're sober. Congratulations.
Tony, would you like to respond to that? Because I know you're a big 12 step guy. I know I would, and I'm not a big step 12 girl.
Yeah. And I agree some with what Matt said, and I think that sponsor is here. So the qualifications for a sponsor for somebody is they have been through the 12 steps and they are willing to sponsor you. That's it.
Wow.
If you end up in that, and a lot of people put more on it than necessary. They want to look for somebody who, if they've been to prison, has been to prison. They want to look for somebody, if they're a mom, they were a mom too. They're around the same age and they like the same things. That's not what that's not what the book says to do. The book says find somebody, and generally, a male matches with a male and females match with females. Okay, and the reason for that, or if you match with what your sexual preference is not. Okay, and the reason for that is you don't want anything sexual to get in the way of learning and being able to get through the steps. Okay, and that's why that's there. But people tend to think that they have to look for somebody and have this person who is going to become their best friend and going to they're going to hang out with. That's not what a sponsor's for. A sponsor, it says find somebody who's been through the 12 steps and is willing to sponsor you. That means they're willing to pick your phone calls up. They're willing to meet you to go over the 12 steps, and they might be there, when you're going through a crisis or whatever, to answer the phone. That's it. I think that, any other expectations of a sponsor beyond that, it generally ends up happening that you become close with your sponsor the longer you stay sober, and if they've been sober for a while, but those aren't requirements. I mean, some people don't hang out, call their sponsor outside of needing guidance through what they're getting through on a daily basis, and that's completely fine. It's all about it's kind of a crapshoot in terms of how the relationship turns out. But here's what the book guarantees: the book guarantees that if you go through the 12 steps with somebody that's been through them, and then you turn around and start taking other men and women through the book, you will stay sober. At a nutshell, the program is as simple as that.
Tony, I'm going to say a word, and I wonder how you're going to feel about it. But I feel like intimacy is one of the lessons through that process. And when I say intimacy, I don't mean the sexual kind of intimacy. I mean that relationship intimacy, right? Like, I feel like so much of the relationship with a sponsor is like retooling or rethreading what I perceive to be like intimate relationships, right? Because like you're building going through the steps, you're building trust, right? You're building, communication patterns. You're getting honest about, what you've been through, and sharing intimate moments of your life. And like asking someone else what their thoughts are, or just kind of like processing that, right? So to me, it's like almost like relearning what an intimate relationship is. And so that can get confused, talking about that sexual side of it, right? Like that can get confused in a sexual nature, because it's so giving, right? Like you're giving of yourself, um,
Yes.
and trying to get through that process. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I definitely, I definitely think that it is. Your sponsor is basically your first guide and your hands-on person to teaching you how to live. And this could, I've had situations with my sponsor that, me and the person I was in a relationship with were going through a tough time. And I basically, after we had our bout or argument, or, what I'm saying, difference or whatever, he told me that, he said, don't respond to her until you text me what she texted you. I will text you what to say to her. So because I had to basically tell him I have no idea what to say. you know so this person is a person who is teaching you how to live life based on their experience, strength, and hope
Mm-hmm.
through the 12 steps. So absolutely, what you said is you are learning. You are learning almost every type of relationship, whether it's with your family members, your brother, sister, mother, father, aunt, uncle, grandmother, whatever, friends at work, co-workers, bosses. You're learning how to interact and deal with them through this one person who you have put your complete trust in. And the reason that you put your trust in them is because they've been through the process and they said, hey, I'm willing to help you. Are you willing to reach back out to me and ask for help?
Yeah, it's such a courageous exploration, right? Like because it does take that trust, um, to go there with someone, and to trust your life, or responses. And so much of our experience as human beings, like we can get defensive over what we've experienced, or how we would do something or respond to something. And and it's because we've been harmed in responding in different ways. And to just admit that, like, I don't know what to say here, can you help me with this, is an act of courageousness, right? Like in and of itself, it's like I would have handled it this way because this is attacking my ego, this is hurting me, and I want to retaliate, or I want to shrink into a hole, or I want to do something else. So getting someone else's objective view, right? Like, because they're not in your shoes, not being provoked from an emotional standpoint necessarily, which leads them to be more conscientious of what they're going to say and how they're going to respond, which gives you an edge, right? Like with regards to kind of like how I handle this and not make it worse for myself, or ruin this relationship potentially.
Yeah, and I want to draw one comparison, and
Yeah.
it was a parallel in my life, and I'll name the two people that I'm talking about sponsor wise and the two people that I'm talking about therapy wise. So my first therapist was a Harvard graduate. She was a 6'2" blonde named Sherry. Okay. And she worked at Williamsburg Place in Virginia years ago. And I'll never forget her because that was the first time, I'd seen it on TV before. That was the first time I sat down with somebody one-on-one and, kind of told her a little bit about myself. And when I say little bit, I mean very little bit. I mean, she got the surface part, and she was good at what she did, but she got the surface part of me back when I think I was 22 or 23 then. Okay. Around that same time, I had a guy who was my first real sponsor. He took me through the book, not all the way, but we got to, I think, 7 or 8, and he got some of what was going on with Tony. Okay. He knew me very well because we were best friends when he came in, but he got a little bit of what was going on with me, right? March that down the road through 10 or 12 to 14 more years of pain, right? And I remember being in, and Manny happened to be my therapist when I was at Steps. And I remember being in his office. And for the first time, you know, when in a group setting and our one-on-ones, I was being honest and being myself. See, the layer of the onion had started to be peeled off through the pain that I had went through, right? So I remember sitting in Manny's, you know, sessions and being like, man, dude, I don't want to be here. Like, and I was being honest for the first time. I wasn't telling the treatment center what they wanted to hear. I was telling them, listen, this is I don't want to be here. Like, and I was going off, and I had a lot of days there where, you know, I said some stuff that was on my mind that I had never said before. And the same thing happened when I got the sponsor here. So I say all that to say, just getting a sponsor early on and for the first time for people's loved ones, as time goes on, and even if, you know, they don't stay sober through it, as time goes on, the layer of the onion is going to get peeled back. And they're going to get realer and honester and more honest with themselves. And, you know, whether it's their first therapist or their 10th therapist or their first sponsor or their 10th sponsor, when you have that pain out there and that time, you know, when you come in that time that you're ready, you're going to get completely honest. And that's what's really going to help you start on the path to stay sober for a long time.
Yeah, I find them to be very like complimentary oftentimes. Like I've had clients that, you know, in therapy, you're kind of talking through like what's going on in your head and hearing it out loud and maybe seeing it in a different way. But it's still kind of up to you to draw your own conclusions and decide like what you want to do with that information. And then, you know, I've had clients say like, oh, maybe that's a better question for my sponsor, where it's like they know that I'm not going to tell them what to do, but their sponsor might. You know, because sponsors can be strict. Like I've seen sponsors say, if you don't call me every day for the first 3 weeks, I'm not your sponsor anymore. If you're gonna date this girl in early recovery, I'm not your sponsor anymore. Like they are telling you the life decisions that you need to make in order to be there and support you. And that's, you know, part of the willingness of surrendering my will and my life over to the care of God and like a higher power, which is I'm going to put faith in my sponsor that they know exactly what I should be doing from an objective standpoint that will work. Because like as much as I really want to date that girl in my, you know, group therapy, maybe it's not going to turn out so well. And like my sponsor has probably done that and realized that, and now they're going to tell me not to do it. And if I'm willing to do what another person is telling me to do, then that's like surrendering my own will in a really important part of the process.
It's really where the two are really synergistic, right? Like relationship with the sponsor and relationship with a therapist, if used like correctly, can be huge on progress and on your own self exploration. And you know, we can't do it alone, right? Like that, like we are a tribe species. Like we need people. We need people in our lives and to emulate from, to grow with, all those things to talk through. You know, why the two components are really important. I mean, someone who's quote unquote gaming, you know, the system, you know, they can game a therapist. I don't necessarily think they can game a sponsor necessarily, because it's just more or less like, I know what you're doing and I don't necessarily care if that's just not where you're at. And that's what I've seen a lot of times over the years with, because at the end of the day, and this is what, you know, something I picked up through the years with you know, working alongside sponsors, is it's like at the end of the day, you're gaming yourself, right? Like you're not really gaming anyone but yourself. And I can call back to different clients that I've had over the years that have basically said that to me, about, you know, I spent years just kind of like fooling myself that I could do this. And you know, and that's a very fortunate place for people to get to at that point, you know, where they realize and look back and can get there. And again, that doesn't, for me, that doesn't even erode, you know, the work that gets done with a sponsor or a clinician. It's actually just, again, goes back to that planting seeds. You know, if we built a relationship that you can come back to me and tell me that you gamed me or whatever, that's great. I'm glad you're alive, and I'm glad you realized that, and, you know, that you did some work, you know. You know, because that's really an important process to this whole thing. So, yeah, I just, it just points to all the evidence that like it's, if people can engage in both, it is a huge impact and a huge positive growth.
Can I ask Manny a question? So,
Yeah.
um, sorry, Mace, to take your job from you, but
No, this is great.
you know,
I'm really
I'm curious, and I'm kind of thinking about this as like a family member too. Like in your role, I'm sure you've seen hundreds of clients that you can tell are serious and will likely be successful in their recovery. And there's other clients that you can get a pretty good inclination early on or through their course of treatment that like it might not be the last time you see them. Um, are you able to kind of talk about like what differentiates those, like what attitudes, behaviors, patterns you've observed? So like I, as someone that cares about this person, can tell if they're serious or not.
That's a phenomenal question. Um, I could throw a dart at a picture, if you put all the clients that I've ever had, on the wall and just throw darts at, I'd probably have a better shot at predicting who was going to quote unquote make it or not, right? And that's both lighthearted and sad at the same time, because many people have not made it over the years, and um, it's tough. It's very tough. What I can say to that question, Matt, is that similar to what Tony was saying, it's like time. If I see someone that has gone through detox, residential, PHP, IOP, and is still committed to attending services similar to attending meetings, like that is a great predictor of ongoing success. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be a slip. It doesn't mean that there's not, situations that arise in their own lives that just, they weren't in control of. Um, but it's just that there's a shift, right, from that you see in individuals that just like take it to the next level, and they're using their sessions. They appreciate sessions. They want to include families into their process. They're not hiding what's going on for them, even and especially, I'll say, they're not scared to say they want to use. Right, like that to me is not a predictor of relapse. Like that to me is like, okay, like let's get into it. Why? What's going on? What would it do for you? And like, and you can have more meaty conversations around truth, regardless of that truth. It's the same with, clients that experience suicidal ideations, right? Like, let's not be ashamed of that. Let's talk about it rather than hiding it and keeping it in the dark, because like anything you keep in the dark, it grows. Um, so it's those signs, Matt, I think, that are like the best indicator that someone's trying, that someone's making effort, and that effort can translate to obviously planting more seeds and planting more seeds, and that thing growing to a garden, of recovery. Oftentimes you'll hear me say like, what they're like, what hurdles or obstacles are you putting in the way of relapsing? Right. And so, like, because there are going to be so many moments in your life that are going to induce pain, that are going to introduce you to discomfort and shame and guilt and all types of pain. And the less amount of barriers, the less amount of hurdles you have in the way of using that you've built for yourself, the easier it is to use. So that means, like, what relationships do you have with therapy or people in your groups? What relationships do you have with sponsorship and do you have a home group? Do you have friends that you talk to readily? Are you open with them? Are you honest with them? Because one way, shape, form, or another, one of those friends isn't going to pick up the phone. You're going to be, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and you're going to push away a loved one. Your therapist, you don't have to call back or go to a session. Your sponsor, you could just delete the number, right? All these things, there's so many excuses. I don't want to get out of bed, right? I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to, so like all of these protective factors, the more you have, if you have 30, and 29 of them you just pushed away, well, like, I have no real reason not to do this other thing, right? So it's like it's just that much easier to kind of engage at least in one, with as many as you have. And so those are all predictive factors of support and safety and building something that can help you in the longevity of your recovery.
So I want to bring it back around to a family question. And what advice or suggestion would you give family members who they have a loved one and they want them to either go to therapy or get a sponsor? What would you suggest? What would you tell them?
I mean, they want them to only do, they want them to do one or the other.
Well, it's not that they want them to do one
or either or
the other, but they're watching this podcast and they're like, as I'm listening to the three of you, I'm like, damn, I got one shot.
Yeah, which one is more important?
Which one is more important? Which one should I? And I don't like to use the word push. I always say this: you can't, you can't force somebody to change or want something. You can only lead a horse to water. You can't make them drink. But I always say, if you feed them enough salty crackers, they'll want to take a drink. So what salty cracker should I feed them so they'll take a drink of a sponsor or a therapist?
I mean, and you guys who have watched and definitely you three probably know what I'm going to say. And I'm going to say it, I'm going to say sponsor. And the reason that I'm going to say sponsor is because I have never, not once, and that's wrong English. And when my mom watches this, she's probably going to tell me that, don't you know, I was an English teacher for 40 years and you said never, not once on the podcast, but never, not once have I heard anybody staying sober for a long period of time without a sponsor. Also, too, here's the thing. If I can't stay sober, the chances of me meeting with my therapist are very slim. I will never walk into your office, Mace or Manny or my any therapist, licensed therapist. If I'm getting high, that's the last place I'm going. That in around any police. So the sponsor is vital in helping you begin your journey and staying sober. So it's almost like, I'm not going to, until I detox and hit the treatment center. I mean, the therapist it's not in the question. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not able to stop long enough in order to sit down with them in their office. So I think that if you were on the outside and you were saying, okay, so, here's the thing. I'm we'll either get us, press upon them a sponsor or a therapist, then I would have to lean towards a sponsor, because and especially in today's day and age where mental health and stuff is so out in the open and people are so more than 10 or 15 years ago willing to talk about it. That sponsor is one of the things they're going to tell you and ask you first is, do you have a therapist? And if not, they will suggest that you get one. It wasn't like that probably 10, 15, even 5 years ago, but I'm telling you now around the rooms, it's a common. I mean, we talk about mental health a lot in the meetings and all, all the ramifications of it. So it goes hand in hand so much, but I would have to give the edge to the sponsor.
So I have one follow-up question, then Manny, I'll go ahead and let you go. So Tony, I'm a mom or I'm a wife and my loved one does not have a sponsor. What would be your recommendation for me to approach them in a way that doesn't feel like I'm badgering them? Why don't you have a sponsor? I just listened to this podcast. Tony says you need a sponsor. What would you recommend? What would you suggest? Coach me to get my loved one to consider a sponsor.
Well, if that person is not an alcoholic themselves and is not in the process themselves, the numbers the research that my brother used to. My brother is he has a law degree, and he works somewhere for somebody important. But he used to always tell me early on when he would come visit me at halfway houses and stuff, is he said, listen, because he's a numbers guy. He was the first one that told me. He said, Tony, he said, I was like 22 years old, I think. He came to see me at my halfway house. I was in Virginia, and he said, this is tough. He's like, the numbers aren't good, man. He said, do you know that 2 out of 10 people, which is a very low number, stay sober over 20 years consistently? Because he researched this stuff and he looked it up. So long story short, that person just needs to say, hey, listen, I've done a little research. The numbers are not high. The percentage is not high of you staying sober without a sponsor.
Okay.
So if you don't have a sponsor yet, what I can kind of read between the lines and say that how serious are you about and how committed are you to this new way of life that you have promised me, that you have told me that you are trying? I'm not sure that I can really believe that until I hear more about who your sponsor is, what you guys are doing together, and so on and so forth.
Okay, awesome. And I'll throw this out to any one of you. Like, some folks are really against AA. I hear it from, it's a cult to, it's a religious movement. So I don't want folks to leave here feeling like, okay, it's either a sponsor or therapy. There are other programs out there.
Yeah.
A mentor, a coach, Dharma Recovery, Smart Recovery. So I just want to make sure folks hear that too, that there's other, if you get pushback on, the sponsor thing, that
Dharma, there's Recovery Toolkit, Smart Recovery, CA, NA. There's a ton of resources now, more than ever, to Tony's point about, more and more people are talking about what's going on and what's underlying, with addiction as well, which is really about pain. But Tony really hit it out of the park with his response. Hard to rebuttal, even though I want to say therapy, but I really ultimately do think that, and I don't know if this is the conversation, because I really love what you said. Because, I'll say this: remaining objective is very, very difficult when it's your loved one, and so having that conversation of like what I'm observing, like Mace always says, is like really tough to do. But it is a really important way to approach someone that's struggling with addiction, is really, just like, I'm observing these things and I'm seeing them, and we had conversations, and it is my emotions, it's my fear that you're not taking this seriously. That's not something you have to do to protect me or take care of me, but at the same time, I'm noticing these things, and there is research that suggests that this works. So why not try it? I'll say a lot of times why people don't continue is because of some adverse experience that they had in a meeting or with another sponsor or with a therapist, right? So, we have to remember that these are human beings as well. And so that doesn't mean just because you're a sponsor or you're a therapist that you are infallible, right? Like that you don't make mistakes or, have different judgments or respond different ways. So I always like to say that same adage of like, hey, go to 6 meetings, 6 different meetings, fellowships, same fellowships, whatever, go to 6 different meetings, 6 different locations, just to get a feel for what culture each meeting brings to you. And do you feel comfortable in that space? Because ultimately that's where the healing is going to begin, where you feel comfortable to be honest and to be yourself. And that applies to a therapist or sponsor or home group meeting, et cetera, et cetera. Because like, yeah, I could say therapist, but we're pushing therapist down your throat, and the reality is like you're not connecting with this person, and it's not working. And there are many reasons why sponsorship, there is comfort in that and familiarity and those kinds of things. But like I said, they're people too. So, the way Matt was describing, you have to do it this way or you're fired. That might not resonate for people, and it might deter them from getting connected with somebody, but not everyone's like that. So, it's really tough for me to say which one or the other based on like real evidence of like we're just human beings, and just like therapists, I might not connect with everybody, that comes into the office. I try, but it may not work, and that's okay. Try someone else. Try a different person, because there will be a connection. There will be at some point, but you have to keep trying.
Yeah, you gave us a real Sophie's choice there, Mace. And I think, I'm sitting here fighting my own self, like trying to decide which side I fall onto. And the answer, I think, is it depends. And a question that a loved one could ask, and something that like you'll hear a lot in AA, which is like, you're telling me that you want to get sober, you're telling me that you need help, and like the answer is right here. And you won't pick it up, you won't read it, you won't talk to somebody about it. And that tells me that you're not that serious about it. Or you're scared. You know, Getting a sponsor can be scary. I remember getting my first
Right.
sponsor. I heard a guy speak in a meeting. I said, wow, this guy has a lot in common with me. Like Tony was talking about, we were raised in the same town, kind of went through some similar experiences. I thought he thought a lot like me. And he said, I'm willing to sponsor. All those things perfectly aligned. I still walked up to him feeling like I was hitting on a dude at a bar. And it was a really uncomfortable feeling for me, and he said yes, but it was scary, right? Like I didn't
Yeah,
know how I was gonna feel, if anyone around me was gonna judge me or think I was weird. So maybe the fear of asking is what's holding them back,
absolutely.
Yeah.
and or the commitment's scary too. And I think part of the reason I say it depends is, Tony brought up the mental health side, and there's the dual diagnosis, there's the primarily substance abuse, and there's the primarily mental health. Um, and it's like, kind of, which side do you fall on? Like, do you think more that your mental health has been so debilitating that you fall into drugs and alcohol? In which case, I would recommend therapy, because you need to, work on your mental health and figure out like this offshoot of whatever's happening to you. Or do you think that like substance abuse is your main problem? Obviously there's deeper stuff like traumas, but is that the first thing that needs to be tackled? And the thing I will say is that like I've had a therapist that I was showing up drunk to our virtual sessions during COVID, and I didn't think that I had a drinking problem at that time. And she was still there. She was still working with me. And looking back at it, I realized like, had I actually just been more honest about like what I was doing, she could have helped me. But I was too afraid of being judged. And to quote Tony, the work can't start until I'm sober with a sponsor, right? Like the sponsor's not going to sit with me and read step 4 and 5 when I'm like putting back shots of tequila. But like the therapist has a longer term relationship with me, that if I relapse, I can go back in there, maybe talk about it, which I could with a sponsor too. But, like I think it really depends on which, the sponsor is the master of one and the therapist is kind of the jack of all trades. So which avenue do I really need to explore if I can only pick one?
Tough.
Love that.
Tough.
That.
Answers both.
Yeah.
If you can.
The sponsor is free though, so I will say that.
Oh, well, there is that.
I,
That
I,
is
I always say those 12 steps are the best free therapy in the world.
right.
I mean, if you really like look at those steps and take a deep dive into them, and listen, they make a bold claim. You've heard me say this before, that if you follow them, you will have a spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
And who doesn't? Well, I
Yeah.
mean, I want a spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
And
There,
I don't think that you need to have an addiction problem to go through the 12
Yeah.
steps.
They're
I think if
phenomenal.
you just take out the word alcohol, like a lot of people could truly benefit from examining their resentments, their fears, their sexual
Absolutely.
conduct, and like, having a connection with something greater than yourself.
Yeah. And taking an inventory every day, because that's one of actually printing them out so I would have them. Continue the 10th step. Now, there's research done. Most people quit at the 4th step, and it's the most difficult step. But if you
Yeah.
make it to the 10th step, continue to take a personal inventory. And when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So can you imagine every day, like just taking a personal inventory and being like, oh crap, man, I was wrong here, and admitting it, like, man, that's some good stuff. The other thing I want to say about therapy, is this. When you think about somebody who is serious about their recovery, not just getting sober, not just stopping, getting drugs and alcohol out of your system, but is really serious about their recovery, getting this space of well-being. You literally have to almost, and I don't know if that's grammatically correct, reinvent yourself. And you have to learn how to communicate in an effective way. You have to learn all of a sudden emotional regulation, because I don't have drugs and alcohol now to numb my emotions. You've got to learn how to problem solve. You've got to learn stress management. Like you've got to learn to build your self-esteem and your self-confidence. So there's just all this stuff that you have to learn. And I think if you have a good therapist, and there are good therapists and there are average therapists, and there are not that many good therapists, but to have a therapist to really help you with those things, I think is invaluable. I mean, it's just, we don't want to underestimate the magnitude of what a person is going through and what they're faced with when they, decide to enter into recovery. I mean, it's a reinventing of yourself.
The only way out is through.
Yeah.
And so what we get a choice in is who are we going to feel comfortable going through it with?
Yeah. So I think we're going to start wrapping up. We didn't get to couples therapy and family therapy. But when I think of recovery, and again, this is, if this resonates with anybody, great. If it doesn't, just leave it. But when I look at recovery, I look at first putting the fires out within yourself and working on yourself and getting yourself stable and to a space where you're really focusing on yourself. And then I feel like the next phase is mourning the losses, because I feel like anybody coming out of an addiction has to mourn. There's a lot of losses that you have encountered, and you need that space to mourn those losses. And then I think the third phase of your recovery is repairing and rebuilding relationships. So family members have a tendency to want to jump in on the front end to repair and rebuild. And I try to encourage them. The front end is just to help the person who's struggling to put the fires out. Like, let's just all work together to get the fire out. And then to be there as a support as you go through the mourning process of what you've lost. And then get to that rebuilding phase and repairing and that healing phase. And time on that, I couldn't give you a time. It's different for every person. So that's my takeaway, and that's my suggestions for the evening. I'd like each of you to go ahead and just, give, a few takeaways from tonight that you want to highlight and leave with folks. and then we'll call it a wrap.
Yeah, and this has been great. It was so good, Manny, to see you not only and to hear you again, man, because you were definitely a therapist that helped change my life. And when you say somebody helped change your life, that means, my dad told me something interesting when I went down and saw him for the first time at Christmas. He said, Tony, he said, me and your mom's dying wishes are that you and your brother hear our voices after we're gone. And when he told me that, he said, because if you do, he said, that means that we did our job and we have affected your life in a positive way. Anybody whose voice you hear when you're not in contact with them so much anymore, or, you haven't talked to them in years or seen them in years, that means they affected your life. And when I left, Levittown for the first time, I could remember things that that Manny told me. And I can remember things that when you do that, that means somebody affected your life. I hope that, you urge your loved ones, family members, to find that sponsor or that therapist. Let's not act like, this is one is more important than the other, or one is going to be the savior and the other one is going to be the failure. They are both equally important. I think depending upon your financial status, depending upon where you are demographically, maybe it might be easier to get a sponsor or it might be easier to get a therapist. But how about this? How about that person, whether it's a sponsor or a therapist, could be the person that helps change your loved one's life in a positive way for the rest of their life. And that might not mean that's, they're not going to have hardship and relapse after that. But I'll tell you this, when the light does come on, as I like to say, and they begin to stay sober and get their lives together a day at a time, this is going to be a voice, whether it's that sponsor or that therapist, that we continue to urge them to find, that they continue to hear, and it's going to help them for the rest of their lives on their journey of sobriety. So that's my wrap up for this session, man. This was a really good session. I really loved it. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Tony. Matt or Manny, who wants to?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Manny, I just want to thank you for coming on. I remember going through STR, and I have friends that did as well, and some that went to therapy with you, and they would talk about this Manny guy, and I was like, I don't know who this guy is, and they'd be like, oh, he's the guy with the really nice hair, but and like they would, like Tony said, they're like, dude, he saved my life, whatever, and I was like, man, I really want to work with this Manny guy. And so I took it personally and I got a job at STR. But it's really cool. Like I didn't get to work with you in the sense that I would have wanted to, but I do get a lot of like guidance, mentorship, and leadership from you, which is really cool, and I'm grateful to you for. But really, like what I took away from tonight when you were talking about, maybe some key characteristics that people can exhibit to determine like, you know, a slightly better guess than throwing a dart at a board on their recovery is like the willingness that they're demonstrating. Are they willing to take feedback? Are they willing to put the work in? Are they willing to humble themselves and listen? And also insight, I think, is incredibly important. Do I have the ability to say something and reflect on it and think maybe how I could have done it better, or identify a pattern of behavior? Because it's really hard to be so wrapped up in your own kind of self that you can't see it from an objective point of view. And I think that's why, the sponsor and therapist are so important, is because they help you kind of get out of your head and, see how you interact with the world.
Yeah, beautiful points all across. And I'm humbled and honored to be here with you both, and Mace as well. We've worked over the years together. And I just, it is a great reward to do this work. it's challenging. It's it's breathtaking. It's hard, and at the same time, it's just yielded so many wonderful um, memories and experiences. And I get to talk with you all. I think the takeaway for me for this conversation, and there's just so much to say. I could be another hour with one because I love talking to you all. But two, it's just addiction itself is a manifestation of so many things going on in someone's world. And I think, looking at it from the vantage of trauma and pain, and its understanding of kind of that process of getting through something that worked for so long in someone's life, and later on only finding out that it wasn't working, is a really shameful thing to experience and very hard to overcome. And then all the things that happen as a result of using for so many years, and then just it's very hard to dig through all of life's experiences and find out what's at the core of this. Um, and that's why I say it's so important to have the relationship with someone that you feel like you can be honest with, and kind of be yourself with, because that's really what so much masking is about, is not really knowing who I am at the end of the day. And I think that's really where the human experience is the most relatable form, is like, who are we really, and it's just like, we're not like using that, what's the movie, Fight Club, right? Like, you're not your khakis, right? Like, you're not your job, you're not all the things you have, you're not all these relationships. Like, you are you, and there's someone underneath there, and then there's an experience, right? Like, as a kid, getting through whatever you had to get through in life, right? And so much can be said about that experience. And um a lot has happened for individuals. And I've enjoyed being part of that process for so many people, experiencing this, and trying to get through this. And you know it's tough. It is very, very tough to do it alone. But you need people to get through it, because you need to know that you're worth it. You need to know that you're important, not only to your loved ones, but to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to close with a quote for our family members and for anyone who's listening, who may be listening, who's struggling with an addiction. But it's this: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.